Hi, today we are in San Francisco with Dave from Technorati. Dave, who are you and what do you do?
My name is David Sifry, and I'm the founder and have done a bunch of different jobs over at Technorati.
Okay. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background, what you did before you started this company.
Sure. So I grew up in Long Island, a suburb of New York, and I grew up with just two terrific parents, both of them who were teachers. And I think that actually brought out this, they taught something to me around the joy of, watching somebody's lights go on, like watching them when they really get something, right? And that was always something that I enjoyed. And but at the same time, I was also a very nervous and geeky kid. And so my dad, as a teacher, one summer brought home my first computer, which was a Commodore PET, the big metal computer with the chiclet keyboard and literally a cassette tape drive. And he said, I'm bringing this home so it doesn't get stolen. Right? Because he worked in Bushwick, which was not a very good neighborhood. Nowadays, it's actually this great neighborhood in Brooklyn, but back then it was not a terribly good neighborhood, and they had security guards on the doors in the school and so on. So he brought it home and said, "Go do whatever you want with it." And I was fascinated. I mean, I just took to it, and I spent the entire summer just teaching myself how to program BASIC.
Great.
And I wrote my first programs, and you can get that incredible sense of just like, what does it feel like to build something by yourself and sort of be the master of that little world. And that was great, and I really enjoyed it and got a number of different computers. And then, when I got into high school, I got social again. Like I really wanted to be able to go out and engage with the world. And I realized that, wow, like there are all these skills, these things that I can do where I can help people. They would come to me and they would say, we have these consulting projects, like, could you build this for me or build that for me? And, for them, I could imagine they were probably thinking, I got this high school kid and he's, building this thing that I would have to spend thousands of dollars on. I give him a few $100s. And for me, I was like, wow, this is fabulous, right? Like, this is more money than I've seen, than my parents have ever given me. And so I got really bitten by the entrepreneurial bug. And I started in college. I studied computer science down in Baltimore, and during the summers and even during the year, like I would have a computer consulting business on the side just to be able to help pay the bills and pay my way through college. And that was fabulous. Like really just enjoyed it. Just loved selling. I loved being able to help people solve their problems, and it was great having a skill that for me was easy and fun, and that for other people, like they were getting a tremendous amount of value from it. And when I got out of college, I went to my first big company where I went to work for Mitsubishi Electric in Japan, and I spent there about 3.5 years being the first foreigner in my factory in 17 years. So it was like me and 4,700 Japanese people. And like that was a fantastic experience, just in a different way, right? To be able to see what it's like to live in another culture and to learn to speak Japanese and to see how other people live. But also on the other side, it really taught me, so this is what working in a big company is like. And I realized that just was really unsatisfying for me. Like I love to be able to participate in the decisions and see what I was doing and how it directly affected people. And so when I came, and also this was like the early 1990s, and you would hear about all of these magical places, and a place called Sunnyvale, and Oakland, and Walnut Creek, or these places that just fired the imagination, Cupertino, Mountain View, San Francisco, just the names of it, sounded just fabulous. And I knew that I wanted to come out here. And I went and I worked on Wall Street for about a year when I got back from Japan, but that was all just a launch pad for me. Like I just knew like it was fabulous and it was great to learn something about how the market worked, but like all I really wanted to do was to get out here. And so I came out here in 1995. My impression of Silicon Valley at the time, by the way, was Santa Cruz. Right, which if you know anything about Silicon Valley is sort of like that's way over the hill. That's sort of like the hippy dippy place back then, right? Where but it was a great place just to at least get settled and to learn what was going on. And I got very heavily involved with the open source community, and in particular around Linux and other open source software. And so by getting involved with that community in the really relatively early days, like I got to know a lot of those people, right? Like Linus Torvalds, who would, whenever he would come into town, like we would have like a user group meeting, and see him, or a bunch of those people. And then as Linux was taking off, like my first business, which was, it started from the consulting that I was doing, found two partners, and we thought, like, let's go build a business together based on this Linux-based open source VPN system, right? Which, nowadays people think, oh, VPN, sure. But back then in 1995, people were like, what's a VPN? And what's this Linux thing? And like, you don't pay for it, and how are you guys going to make money? I mean, there were all sorts of big questions that no one really understood or could explain well. And that business didn't do very well. But what we learned from it was we learned a ton just about banging on doors and how to write a business plan. I mean, we ended up writing a business plan that was about that thick. And what I realized afterwards was, wow, we spent all of this time writing a business plan and not very much time actually running a business.
Right.
And that you can really get caught up in this idea of, we need to figure out who all of our customers are going to be and what the competitive marketplace is and how we're going to do product marketing, and then not actually ever do any of that stuff. And so, the other half of this was to learn that the best business plans are literally ones that I can write on the back of a napkin, right? Like, because if you can articulate your value proposition that clearly, you've probably got something that's going to be really interesting. But back then we didn't know. We were kids, we were just figuring all this stuff out. And so that business, which was called Secure Remote, really just, it failed. But we got to know a lot of people in the Valley. And very interestingly, so this was in around September of 1998. So my two friends and I, who were pretty heavily involved in the Linux community, realized, wow, you know what, it's too late. We missed the boat on this particular product. Big companies like Cisco were coming out with competitive products. And so we said, how about instead, like, what is it that we're 6 to 9 months ahead of everything else in that we think we could actually build a business around? And so we were all kind of, like, literally we were standing in the parking lot of one of the VCs here on Sand Hill Road. And after very nicely having our hats handed to us yet again, right? Like, we love you guys, but we just don't see what the business is. And one of my partners said, hey, well, what about like, service for Linux, right? Like, there's nobody out there that's doing tech support or professional services or any of that stuff for this operating system. And he was an old Apple guy, and so essentially what he said was like, how come there's no Apple Care for Linux? And all three of us looked at each other, we were like, oh my God, of course. And so on that day, Linux Care was born. And that company, like, was the exact contrast where I remember we spent maybe a week rewriting some of the business plans. So now the business plan is this thick. And we're just thinking, look, it's service and support for all things Linux. And we knew all of the people who were involved in the community, and we went to go, okay, we're going to go do a big launch. And we went and talked to our first PR agency just as a vendor. And right as we were done, the woman who ran the agency, a woman named Melody Holler, said, okay, now I'm going to take my PR agency hat off, and I want to put my investor hat on. Are you guys looking for money? And we all looked at each other. We're like, oh my God. Like, we've been out there for like the last 2 years trying to pitch this business, and we're not even trying to pitch you, and you're trying to come and give us money. And that's the power of when you have a good idea that has real value, that is timed well, right? Like, and that's, a lot of that is luck, and a lot of that is opportunity. Like, I believe that, people fundamentally get the same amount of luck, right? I mean, that's sort of the definition of luck, right? It's random. But the people who are lucky are the ones who are prepared to do something with that. And so at the time we were prepared, like we'd learned from that failure before, okay, here's what we do and here's how we jump on it. And within a few months we had raised $5.5 million from Kleiner Perkins, one of the premier venture capital
before
firms.
Launching or after?
This is before launching.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Not too bad.
And we were running around with I remember the three of us like running around with this big checkbook and just $5.5 million in the bank,
Yeah.
and hiring all of our friends,
Nice.
right? People who we knew would be really great at this. And that business really took off. It did very well. And to the point, in fact, where we were growing so fast, we had so many customers that we had to bring in some outside management because the three of us were just like, none of us had ever really run more than, a 5 or 6 person company at the time. And so, long story short, we ended up hiring a CEO who was a professional CEO who really was the wrong guy. Just not the right guy for our company. And it was a good thing to learn there too around how do you deal with a board? Right? Like, and when you have investors, how do you build relationships with your investors? How do you get to know your investors even before they become investors? And that was, again, like a very common mistake I've learned. Like a lot of people make these mistakes, right? And we had to learn them the hard way. And the company grew from literally the three of us to 480 people in 18 months.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. And we were just outgrowing everything, and the company was just going like gangbusters. And then the crash hit in April of 2001, and we had filed for our IPO. We were ready to go out. I mean, it was crazy, and we had a bunch of internal stuff that happened as well with that CEO. And I'm not going to get into all of the details, but suffice it to say that the company did an IPO. And so what we had to do then was go through the downsizing. And, that, while it's an incredibly painful experience, I mean, we had to personally let go a number of people who, like, I very deeply cared for. It's one of those things that you have to learn if you're going to be building a business around how do I set things up so that, number one, the organization that we're building is going to be one that's going to be building revenues and building profits and is going to really sustain itself. And then number two, when business conditions change, how do you make that hard decision? So how do you set up relationships in advance so that people understand, look, we're friends and I love you and I want to spend time with you and I have a great time with you, but also we're in business together. So we need to be careful that, I don't want the friendship to be destroyed because of any potential business things that happen. So anyway, that was a great opportunity. I was the CTO there, and I got to meet some fabulous people who really, really worked hard to build that company up. And I left there in about 2002, and took a little bit of time off because that was a real burnout experience, right? And I've met a lot of entrepreneurs who have been through this, right? Where even when you have a successful exit, that you just get really physically, mentally, and spiritually drained.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that's what happened for me as well. And so I took a little bit of time off, and I was like, that's it. Like, I'm done. I don't want to be an entrepreneur anymore. Like, I just want to go and...
To Mitsubishi again.
or like, really, I was just like, I could barely even read a newspaper. Like, I just was like I just wanted to be quiet somewhere, I joke about it with my wife sometimes, and she says, yeah, Dave, she says, the crazy thing about it was like, I was like, I just want to go like rest on a beach somewhere, right? Well, here's the problem, was that, 2 months later, I was bouncing off the walls, right? And my wife was like, will you get out of the house and go start another business? And she jokes with me sometimes. She says, Dave, like if you ever ended up on a beach somewhere, that'd be great for about 2 weeks. And then after that, you'd probably end up selling people umbrellas, right? Like you'd be the guy organizing all the people on the beach for massages, right? Like, and it's true, right? That there comes a point where you're just, I think as an entrepreneur, that this was the sad part, and it was also a really defining moment for me was realizing that I have this curse.
That's right.
Do you know what I mean?
I totally, yeah.
That you're like, okay, like it's just part of my personality that like I love people and I love being of service to them, and like I just have a really hard time being lazy, right? I have a really hard time not doing anything, and you know, I need something to keep me busy, and I love building things like this. I love getting people together and having a shared vision and, you know, building interesting things. Mm-hmm. And so that was enough to be able to help me to then restart the next business. We built a company called Sputnik in the Wi-Fi router space, and that company is actually still going strong. And then as a side project to that, like I started blogging, right? And, you know, this was very early days of blogging. I mean, this was 2003, 2004. And I remember it was over Thanksgiving weekend in 2003 mm-hmm. that my two partners were both going off on their different adventures. One was traveling somewhere, okay. One was going somewhere else, visiting family. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take a little vacation too. And like the one thing that was always interesting to me was this idea of search.
Okay.
And so I thought, you know what, like I wonder how hard it would be to build a search engine for blogs.
Yeah.
And so I had my DSL connection back home. I think it was like a 128K ISDN connection. Yeah. And I had, you know, two computers that I had bought off of eBay for like $100 each mm-hmm. that were sitting in my basement. And I thought, okay, you know, like let's go try it out. And literally like I was like, what do I call it? And I went like searching on network solutions, you know, just on one of the domain things. Like, you know, I was looking for Digerati, right? Because you want to be able to see like what's going on with the Digerati. Well, that one was already taken, Digerati.com, .org. So I thought, well, what's similar to that? I thought, oh, Technorati. And so there it was, $6.99. And, you know, I was like, great, okay. So I bought it. And that's how Technorati was born, just over, like it was literally just my little science project of, I wonder what it would be like to build a new kind of search engine, one that's based around this real-time web. Mm-hmm. And it kind of surprised me, like it just sort of took off despite me. Right? Like, I mean, I told a few friends about it, and of course, what happens when you tell a blogger anything and they like it? They're going to blog about it, they're going to yell from the rooftops, they're going to talk about how awesome it is, and they're also going to talk about how much it sucks and when they hate it. But it doesn't matter, they're going to talk, right? And so it was an interesting place to be sort of that search engine where this is the place where they all came to, right. So that they're yelling out into the void, did anybody say anything? Did anybody respond back? And so it became very quickly a pretty go-to service for these bloggers, a very, you know, small group. And I thought cool, you know, it was nice on weekends for me, that kind of stuff. But what happened was one day I was sitting in my basement, you know, and like just to give you an idea of my office, like you ever see the Harry Potter movies?
Which one?
You know, well, the first one, right? You know, like the first Harry Potter movie, like there's that cupboard under the stairs mm-hmm. that Harry lives in, like that's his room. Well, that's my office. Like that was my office in my house at the time. And so I'm down there with my dog and, you know, the two servers running off of the DSL line, and I get a phone call. Mm-hmm. And he says, hi, this is so-and-so from AOL. And he says, you know, we here at AOL, we love Technorati. And I'm like, thank you. You know, I mean, if you remember, this is like when AOL had their keywords everywhere. They were on billboards. I mean, it was pretty crazy. They just bought Netscape, if you remember this, mm-hmm. right? And he says, look, you know, we're doing this AOL blogging platform called AOL Journals. And he goes, and we'd just love for you and your team to come down and visit with us, and maybe we can have a talk about doing something together. And I'm like, and I look down at my dog, and my dog's sort of licking himself, and I'm like, the team's kind of busy right now.
But I can come alone. Maybe.
But I'll tell you what, right? Like, how about I'll come down, I'll drive down, we'll set up a meeting. He was like, great, fabulous. Yeah. So I drive down there to Mountain View, to the old Netscape campus, right, mm-hmm. which is now it was then the Facebook campus. Now I'm not sure what it is, right? But you know, that on Middlefield Road, and you know, you come down there, and I walk in, and I meet the guy from AOL, and in walks in 13 other people from AOL, and they're all introducing each other, so they're all handing each other cards, and I'm like, what is going on, right? And the guy sits down. He says, okay, this is Dave from Technorati. Like, we're so happy and welcome everyone. Like, we're going to talk about search and AOL journals. And I noticed there was like one guy there from Netscape Search.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if you remember this, but like Netscape Search, like these guys made Yahoo. Like they created Google. Like this was huge. And he says, yeah, so we'd love to work with you on this product, and we're big fans of yours. Like, we want to do it. And I'm like, look, no offense, right? Thank you. But that guy over there with Netscape Search on his card, like, he's probably forgotten more about how to run a search engine than I've ever learned. Like, why are we talking about this?
Yeah.
And he goes, no. He says, you don't understand. He says, because here at AOL, we don't want to be a walled garden anymore. Like, we want to be part of the blogosphere. Mm-hmm. And for that, we need to be in Technorati. We need to be doing a deal with you. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, okay. And I came home that night. I drove home like in a fog, right?
Yeah.
Like driving up 280, and I'm driving home going, what just happened? Like, he just basically put a business model in my lap.
Yeah.
And I realized, oh my God, like this is way before Amazon Web Services and just Elastic Cloud and all of that stuff. It was like, oh crap, like I'm gonna have to buy a lot of servers and a lot of colos and a lot of networking. We're gonna have to like hire up. And unfortunately at the time, had a number of venture capitalists who at that point I had gotten to know a little bit better. And so I called up, and some fabulous angels. I mean, people like Reid Hoffman, who runs, was at LinkedIn, and Joy Ito, who's over at the MIT Media Lab now, and and Esther Dyson, and it's just like, what do I do? And they were like, take some money, and I'm like, okay. And so in that case, it again like kind of just fell into my lap in a sense, and then the process was, okay, so you've done this before a couple of times. How do you do this in a way that's really going to try to learn from my old mistakes, but then also build something that's going to be flexible and really have, the personality that, I realized like what I really wanted was, what's the environment that I want to be working in for the rest of my life?
Right.
Like that if I could be working here for the next 50 years, that's the kind of place that I want to build. Mm-hmm. And I realized that like even before I hired a single person, so we took a bunch of money. I mean, the money wasn't the problem. There were lots of money and some fabulous VCs who came on board. But I really wanted to make sure that I understood even what my values were. Mm-hmm. And then that my investors shared the values. And fabulous people like Andreas Stavropoulos over at DFJ who just really, really like agreed with the values that I had. And, Ryan McIntyre, who was at Mobius at the time, Ryan's over at Foundry Group now, who really, like Ryan was a founder of Excite, and I was like, oh, great, like you've done this before, you're an ex-entrepreneur, like please, like let's work together. And, to be able to then talk to my investors, not the way it was back at LinuxCare, where I felt like they were my bosses, but instead to talk to them as kind of as my peers and say, look, I don't know what to do, right?
Exactly.
Please help, right? Like, because I know that that's something that like really hurt us back at LinuxCare was this idea that, well, we have to just do it right. We have to figure out whatever it is, and it's us versus the world. And instead, at Technorati, to be able to say, no. You know what? Like, we're all in this together. Mm-hmm. And, we took some money, for example, from some folks at August Capital. Fabulous group of venture capitalists. Really great team there. And like when you come in and you sort of sit down and you do this what they call the Monday afternoon partner meeting, right? Which is sort of like that last thing where they're all just sort of figuring out like, do we give you money or not? And the best advice I ever got was just be honest, like tell the truth no matter what. Mm-hmm. And because I was a first-time CEO, I'd never done this before. Mm-hmm. And so there I am sitting at this beautiful wooden table, this huge wooden table that you're like, you put your head down on it and you're like, oh my God, the stories that this table could tell, right? Of all of these amazing businesses that have gotten funded and built and, I can only imagine. And so they're all saying, okay, so, tell us about your business. You tell them about their business. And then I'm like, look, yeah, it's the search business and it's taking off and could be like Google, but I don't know, and yes, I'm a first-time CEO, so I don't know. And I said, look, so here's the deal. I said, there's really only one thing that I'm going to stand here and I'm totally going to promise you. Because, I can show you all these slides that show the numbers that go up and to the right. And, we all know it's bullshit, okay? Like, we all know, hopefully that's exactly how things are going to go. And we'll all be like, look how smart we are, right? But, these are all, it's speculation. Yeah. So I said, look, there's pretty much only one thing that I absolutely guarantee will happen sometime during the course of this business, and when I'm CEO of this business. I said, look, sometime during the course of your investment, I'm going to screw something up really badly. Yeah. Like, I mean, a whopper, like a huge one, right? And probably it's going to be like, we'll have all talked about it at the board meeting, like, we'll all agree not to do it, and then I'm still going to do it anyway. Right? Because I feel like it's the right thing to do, right? And I'm just going to mess it up. And I'm like, here's my promise. My promise is that I'm never going to lie to you. My promise is that, I'm going to, do what I say and say what I do. That, that I'll come and we'll talk about it beforehand. And that if at any time, you guys feel like, or I feel like it's just not the right time for me to be CEO anymore because it's growing or whatever, I'm happy to step aside. But pretty much that's the only thing that I guarantee. And they were all looked at me and they said, oh yeah, Dave, that's exactly what's going to happen. Yeah. They're like, every single one of our successful investments, that's exactly what happens. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, okay. I go, and by the way, chances are I'm probably going to lose your money. And they were like, we know. And I'm like, where am I? Where am I? This is the craziest meeting I've ever been a part of. But the most wonderful thing about it was that at that moment, I mean, the ability, I walked out of that room a quarter of an inch off the ground. I felt like I was walking on air because I realized that, wow, I just told these people that I was probably the worst case. Yeah. Right? Because I knew that I wasn't going to lie and I wasn't going to be a criminal and I wasn't going to do anything like that, right? Mm-hmm. That I knew deeply, but the thing that I was the most scared of, which was failing and of making a decision and then having it come back on me, that they were totally okay with that. Mm-hmm. And it's the advice that I give to all entrepreneurs is that if you're going to be working with an investor, but even just with a team, and you can't accept that you're going to make mistakes. I make more mistakes in a week than most people make in a year. Yeah. And it's just that's just the nature of what we do. Right. And so you mess up and then you learn from it, or you quickly adapt, right? So it's not about, oh my God, how am I going to make sure that I don't make any mistakes? Because if you don't make any mistakes, you're not taking any risks. Right. But instead it's about saying, how do I create an environment where it's okay as long as I don't make the same mistake twice? Mm-hmm. Let's make tons of new mistakes all the time. My friend Esther Dyson, that's how she says it. She says, always make new mistakes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the best advice. And then to be able to hear that, though, to be able to vocalize that with your investors and the people who are going to be sitting on my board and really feel comfortable that, yes, none of us know what the right answer is, but we're all going to jump into this together, right? And that you trust me that I can help to lead this, that was so empowering because I never felt like, and they talk about the CEO job being the loneliest job in the world. Yeah. I never felt that. Yeah. I always felt like at any time I could just call Andreas or, call Andrew Anker or call David Hornick or, call Ryan McIntyre and just say to them I'm totally lost. I don't know what to do. And they would just, be there to help. Great. And I think that, again, if I was talking to an entrepreneur about that, I'd be like, look, I know you're scared. Everybody's scared. It's okay. I heard it once, fear is like a superpower, right? Just take it because, take it and use it and share it. And that way, you're going to be able to become so much more powerful than if you hold it all inside. Yeah.
Dave, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts and your sharing of knowledge.
Sure, Martin. It's great to meet you, and thanks so much for coming.
Thanks.